Hi, and welcome to my channel. I hold a live painting demonstration with Q&A every month where you can watch me work on a current project and ask as many questions as you want while I explain the process as I go. It's a wonderful opportunity to watch the magic of a painting come to life in real time. If you enjoy this video, be sure to check out the link in the description box below to learn more about the live painting sessions and maybe even join the next one. Thanks for watching and happy painting. Now, sometimes in these studies, I've also been mixing a little bit of the Galkid, which looks like this, into the paint. And that helps give a bit of a transparency, a sense of transparency to it, and also improves the flow. But I don't mix it all the time. Oh, and Paulette, I see your question here. Yeah, the fluorescent colors chosen randomly, or was there a rationale in the choice of colors? So actually, here are my three fluorescent colors, the yellow, orange, and the magenta, the pink. They are somewhat random and somewhat of a rationale. So when I was in Pooch Cove on my artist residency, and one of the other artists was using these colors in her paintings, and I just thought they were fantastic. So she lent me a little blob of each, and I got to practice with them a bit there. So that's why I've used these specific ones. Now, Kama does make a blue and I think a couple others, but I haven't tried them yet. So these colors are basically because they're the ones that I borrowed from my artist friend and got familiar with and enjoyed. However, putting them on the painting, I have chosen specific areas for them. So I've put orange in the sky area, and you can see maybe in the reference photo there's a little bit of sky poking through there, not a whole lot, but to give a sense of sky. The pink in the forest area, and then the yellow for the skin. And that's because I wanted to use complementary colors in the underpainting. So if there was an area that was going to be more blue, like in the sky, I wanted orange coming through beneath it. If there's an area that was going to be more green, like the forest area, then I wanted the pink to kind of temper it almost. And then for the skin, because I did see so much green coming through in the skin, I actually wanted some of the green from the underpainting. So it was kind of the opposite for the green, actually, because when I layer, I'll start painting here a bit, but when I layer a bit of paint over top of it, really thinly, it just gives this beautiful, color. Would you like me to zoom in a bit, or how is this for space?
We got some nods, and
Okay.
it's okay. You've also got another question from Maria. Is the skin palette you're using for outdoors use, or is that your normal palette?
This has been just for these studies and for these outdoor paintings. It's not my normal palette. The only paintings I've painted with this palette have been my series of small studies, and I've done, or it's not finished yet, but I'm working on one larger painting in a similar style. So I won't stay zoomed in this much all the time because it's a lot, I think, but I do want to just show you how that bit of yellow is coming through in the purple there. And maybe you can just see how it gives a bit of richness and depth rather than just having straight up dark purple. So that's why I've chosen to put the colors where they are. And then just before I get started painting, I just wanted to talk about the reference photo for a quick moment. Because I do work from photo references almost exclusively, and they're great to work from, but they have their downsides too. And one thing I wanted to bring up for photo references is that you can tell with this one too, it's even without seeing the figure, it's not a great photo. It's not a photo that's going to win any awards or that would be submitted to some kind of competition. It's blurry. The light is kind of diffused. There was no strong sunlight or anything. So really, in terms of photos, it's not an excellent photo, but it's an informative photo. And that's what I wanted. The sunlight is not too bright, so it's not blowing out the colors. It's not too dark. There's some interest there, and it serves me well as a photo reference. So when you're picking a photo, if you're working from photo reference, really try to think about what purpose the photo will serve the painting. Not whether the photo itself looks great, but is it going to be a good reference, and is it going to make a good painting? And hopefully it will. We're going to find out here.
Question from Paulette.
Mm-hmm.
Did you add colors to your palette because of the green or because of the fluorescent?
Well, neither really. The reason why I added these colors to my palette, I guess, are you meaning probably the larger palette, I'm guessing, like the more expansive palette, is actually because when I came back from Newfoundland in November, my paints were still in the mail. I shipped all my paints back. So these were all the colors that I didn't bring with me, kind of the ones that I don't usually use. And I wanted to get started on some studies. So I used what I had and discovered that they were actually giving this whole range of colors that I wasn't really used to, but were working really nicely for this series. So I'm just trying to open my gal kit here. So it actually wasn't entirely intentional. It was because I didn't have access to my regular palette because it was still in the mail. But I'm glad for that because it just really, expanded my horizons. And it's good to break up routine sometimes. So in these darker parts of the forest, I'm deliberately keeping the paint quite thin. I've added a bit of Galkid to it because I want some of the pink to come through. Another thing that's different is I'm working from the photo on the computer, actually, here, rather than printing it out, which I usually print out the photo. But when I was starting these studies, I didn't have access to a printer, so I just printed them or painted them from the computer. And it was really difficult at first, and still is, but I liked how, I don't know, how I kind of had to interpret the colors a bit more, because on a computer screen, the computer screen is backlit, of course, but paint is not backlit, and a printed photo is not backlit. So I can't actually reproduce the colors that I'm seeing, which means I have to kind of interpret them and make them up. And that's a good challenge for me. And so typically I do pre-mix my palette. So all of these colors here I mixed today. These ones I had already, but I mixed a couple others so that I can paint fairly, in a fairly uninterrupted way. Something else I've been enjoying with this series is learning how to paint a landscape in a way that works for me. Because I really appreciate other people's paintings of landscapes, but they're not really something that captivates me. But I like the colors in them and the, I guess, atmosphere that it's been bringing into the painting. So I've been working on trying to search for shapes and colors rather than, painting individual leaves or trees or something like that. It's been a good way to really remind myself to loosen up with my painting. Using a big brush helps too. And then because these fluorescents are just so compelling, I want to allow some of them to come through, these little patches of color. So the paint will be a little thicker in some areas and thinner in others in order to allow that to happen. And once in a while I add a little bit of the fluorescent colors into my mixtures, but generally speaking I'm not painting much with them, mostly because they're not very light fast. So an oil paint that is light fast will remain the same color even if it's exposed to the sun. And all of the colors except for the fluorescents that I use are light fast. But the fluorescents are not light fast, and little bits of them poking through I'm not terribly concerned about, but I don't want to use them for the bulk of the painting that's on the surface, because I don't want them to lose their chroma, lose their intensity over time. I'd like paintings to be put wherever a person wants, wherever they might end up, and to feel confident knowing that it's going to keep its integrity. I'm trying to keep the background loose but thoughtful. Again, really prioritizing the feeling of it rather than individual details. Another effect I've been enjoying is just to use a rag once in a while to kind of wipe out certain areas. It just adds an effect that's hard to get with the brush alone. And something else I've been enjoying is putting these little scratches. I just use the end of the brush into the wet paint, and sometimes painting over certain aspects of them, but kind of allowing them to act almost like lines in a drawing. You know, to always, I don't know, just sort of pay homage to drawings. And then they add these little pops of color that help to direct the eye and just give some definition to certain areas. It's really a lot of this exploration for me has been about kind of play and not always being deliberate too. It just reminds me that trying new things is so important when creating art. You know, trying new colors from a friend, or trying colors from my own collection that I don't usually use because I have to, because the rest of my paint is in the mail. And sort of seeing like what happens if you restrict certain aspects of your normal practice. So I usually paint the background first, and we'll come to the figure afterward. And again, if any questions pop up for you, or if anything's not quite clear, feel free to ask or make a comment in the chat. Oops. Now, because this area is a bit sort of noisier, let's say, there's more going on. You've got a little bit of sky peeking through, a bit of the kind of scratching there. I'm going to try to keep this corner, which is darker, quite quiet. And for those areas, I'm usually using a mixture of the purple lake and sometimes a little bit of sap green if I want to keep it dark and transparent. Or if I want something a little more opaque and lighter, I'll put some of the cadmium green pale into it. But often, again, in those darker areas, I add a little bit of the galkid, so they don't become too flat and just, you know, like dark void.
Question from Glenda.
Mm-hmm.
Do you make the marks from the pointy part of the brush randomly? It seems to offer some definition to the leaves as you have done them.
And they're not quite random, no. I do try to add definition to the leaf masses, or if there are any big branches, like the branch that kind of falls along here. And you can see that in the reference photo. So I've kind of added that in with the scratching here. So I usually try to follow branches or kind of leaf masses that I want to stand out a bit. In terms of the actual squiggles themselves, they're kind of random. Like I don't necessarily plan out each little curve, but it's more about just getting a sense of kind of the feeling. So now I'm going to start on the figure. Now when mixing the skin colors for the figure, like I mentioned, most of the skin colors are Purple Lake, Cadmium Orange, and Cadmium Green Pale, or kind of similar, you know, with a couple other colors here and there, but those are kind of the base ones. But I also really try to keep the color harmony in mind. So color harmony is understanding the environment that your subject is in and understanding the color temperature of that and seeing how that affects all of the colors that are present for you. So outdoors, the color temperature of the light, which can be kind of cool or warm or somewhere in between, but it's generally fairly cool compared to interior light, which is often warmer. Now, cool light will create warm shadows. So in the shadow areas, generally speaking, I'm going to be leaning those colors towards a warmer color. So having more greens, more oranges in them, and less purple. Because they're warm shadows in this cool light situation. And then the lights will generally be cool. So they're going to have more purple, more blue, and maybe some greens, but very cool greens. This isn't true universally. You know, there's definitely some purple in the shadows, some blues, some coolness. But it's sort of a general rule or general guideline to follow. Also, I find it really helpful for those times where maybe I'm having trouble seeing the color accurately. And again, being on a computer screen, it's backlit, so I can't see it quite the same way I would see the color if it was on a photo or in mixed paint or just from life. So it's a nice system to fall back on, and just to remember that, okay, in general, my lights are going to be cool. In general, my darks are going to be warm. And then if I don't really nail the color, it's not that big of a deal because the system that I'm following is the same throughout. With these colors that I've mixed, they're not representative of all the colors that I will need. I think of them more just as a jumping off point. So I'll make little side mixtures here and there to have a more full range of colors as needed. Switch to a smaller brush. But all of these brushes that I'm using are synthetics, and they're quite kind of soft but springy. Usually in a figure or an object, I find it easiest to start with the darks and work towards the lights. So in the dark areas, I try to keep the paint thin, kind of like I did for the forest here too. And then the light areas can have heavier paint. So those light areas will actually start to really physically catch the actual light, that's shining on the painting. And one thing I've been enjoying about painting small is that it's hard to do a lot of detail. And it's possible, but I'm not working in that way or with extremely small brushes. But that means that it's kind of everything here has to play an active role. There's not a lot of room for, I guess, lazy painting. Parts of the painting that don't actively contribute. But I've really enjoyed seeing how much of an impact even just small pieces can make that don't have detail, because detail is never necessary, really, if the values and structure are established. And detail is always optional. For some of the lightest highlights, I'm using white, so it's this mixture right here, which I think is probably just coming up as white for you, but it's actually white mixed with some of the fluorescent yellow. And it gives kind of a, I don't know, just a really interesting, very cool mixture that looks almost lighter than white. For any creases, I usually paint the dark of the crease first and then paint around that area. So again, that darkness is really sinking back. And for these parts, the light areas here, now that I'm not working on the background anymore, there's no medium mixed into these. This is just straight up paint. You can see I'm also being a little more careful than I was with the background too. Although it takes a while to premix things, to premix colors, it is so nice to be able to just pick up what's needed and paint. I've also really been paying attention to color temperature because some of the lights outside are just so light. Like even not a lot of sun can make something look really light. And we don't have the option in paint, of course, to emit light. Like I said, it only reflects light. So to create a greater sense of light and dark than what values alone will provide, color temperature will help with that. Really get a sense of the cools coming forward and the darks receding in this situation. It might be the opposite somewhere else. And then my second lightest color, which is this pile here, again, because I know those light colors don't really come across well on the screen, that's just white mixed with Old Holland Violet Gray. And Old Holland Violet Gray is a convenience color, really. So it's basically white mixed with a little bit of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. So it's entirely possible to mix that on your own. But if it's a color that you use frequently, it's sometimes nice to have it pre-mixed. When painting the figure, I like to really create kind of vibrant and really hot reflected light. So that's an area which I'm painting right now, but there's a little bit in the belly button here too, where you can really kind of experiment with the chroma and with the temperature. And to me it just gives kind of a fun sense of, well, I guess of body heat in a way, but I find that skin reflected on skin tends to create really warm reflected light. So in those areas, anywhere where there is reflected light, for the figure in particular, generally I kind of ignore the whole color harmony thing. I ignore warm light, cool shadows, cool light, warm shadows, and I just make the reflected light warm, no matter what's happening. Of course, if you did that and it didn't seem to fit, it didn't look very good, then absolutely change it. But I find that's one area where a little bit of pushing the truth can be quite impactful in the painting. You can see too that her hands are blurry here. And it's been kind of a fun effect to play with. So I'm going to move towards this hand here and just kind of experiment with how to paint that, how to render that. I don't really have a system for it at all. And anytime there's kind of an area where I'm not as familiar with painting it, or I don't really know what to do, I find it helpful to paint the areas around it. So it's sort of supported by information throughout, rather than just tackling it all on its own. So I'm going to start with the shoulder. So again, kind of working around the challenging area. And you can think of it as procrastination in one way, or also just arming yourself with as much information as possible, so that you can make the best decisions possible when in these challenging areas. And what you're probably not seeing off the camera here is I have a paper towel in my hand, and I'm wiping my brush on the paper towel almost whenever I go to get another color. So I'm trying to keep my brush reasonably clean. Once in a while I'll clean it in mineral spirits, but not every time. Usually only if it's really kind of logged with paint, or if I'm going from one color to a very different color. Switching to a little fluffy old sable brush just for the crease of the armpit. I'm starting to see some blurriness there. I'm going to work my way around the arm and then work on the hand. Here's an area where I'm keeping the paint thin and allowing some of that green to come through. I'm looking for a darker and cooler bedbug line right here. So that's the reflected light that I painted initially, where I kept it thin and let some green come through. Then you can see the arms are quite warm. So arms often will be kind of a different color than the rest of the figure, just because they usually get more sun. But you can also probably notice in the reference photo in the arm that the highest chroma color, so the most intense, the most saturated color, is right about at the turning. So it's right about what I'm painting now. So it's where the light just starts turning into the shadow, just before the bedbug line. So that's also a really good area in which to introduce higher chroma color. So think about it as kind of this sweet spot between too much light, in the highlight that kind of blows out the color, or too little light, like in the shadow, where you actually can't see the color properly. In the turning, there's just enough light to see the color as kind of as clearly and as strongly as it would be in real life, or as its local color would be. Local color just being the color an object is. Like saying an orange is orange, a pear is green. My temptation is to blend some of this to make it a little softer and fuzzier. I'm going to do that a little bit here, but I'm going to try mostly not to, just because I don't know how this is going to look yet. And I don't want to make those kinds of decisions until I have just a little bit more information. So here I'm using quite thin paint, sort of a warm purplish red, and just kind of mimicking the movement of the hand. I'm coming back with some lighter color here, sort of like a similar color that I used in the shoulder. I'm just going to try kind of dragging the paint up. So I'm only moving up with this. I'm not bringing the paint down. I'm going to just wipe my brush, because now that I've dragged the brush into wet paint, it's picked up the colors that it's moved into. And if I bring that brush back into these colors, it's just going to start mixing everything together. And that's where you start getting muddy paint. So muddy paint is not about the actual color. It's not about kind of grays or browns or anything like that. It's about mixing all of the colors together and basically ending up with like one color, which often is kind of gray or brown. So I want to keep the paint colors clear and crisp, and that means not blending too much. Okay, so I'm curious about this area. I'm just going to bring a little bit of the, now that I've painted the hand, or what we can see of it, I'm going to bring a little bit of the arm down into the hand and then reshape the forearm a bit. And I might, for now, leave the hand at that. I'm not sure if I'm happy with how it looks now, but I would like to see how the whole painting fits together before making that decision. So I'm going to go a little cooler for the light on the arm here. And then I'm going to bring a little more green kind of underneath the arm. And then sort of a warm halo around it. So we can really get a sense of softness and movement coming from the arm itself and not just the hand. So for now I'll leave the hand like that. I'm just going to work on the shape of the arm a little bit though. It's a little too straight along here. It doesn't look arm-like enough. I realize we're approaching 6:30 here. I might go a little bit longer, but probably not too much longer. But if you do need to leave by 6:30, please feel free to, do whatever you need to do around that. And if you have any questions, I'm going to take your lack of questions as hopefully that things have been explained, in an understandable way. But if you have any questions, do please let me know here.
That has a question. The white on the breast looks very bright to me. For me, is that a distortion of color because of the computer, or is it bright?
Let me just double check what my camera's picking up here. Oh, this is quite bright. Sorry, guys. That is brighter than it actually is. Let me change that. Thanks for mentioning that. Okay. That is, on my computer anyways, that's a little bit more accurate as to what I'm seeing. So I think the settings that my camera needed when there was only the underpainting was different than the settings that it needs now that there's paint on it. The white here, though, at the lightest part is quite light. It's the two lightest values mixed together here. So that's the white with a little bit of the fluorescent yellow, and then white with a little bit of Old Holland violet gray. But yeah, it's not quite as blinding white.
Confirmation that looks better now. I'd have to agree.
Excellent. Oops. That is way too dark. Something else that I think has been kind of interesting with these smaller paintings, and something I try to remember for large paintings too, though, is to always use the biggest brush you can for the given area. And while this is a very small painting, that practice still holds true. And I was using this smaller brush at first as I was going into the chest and the upper rib cage area here, which was the brush I was using for the arm. But actually that area doesn't need a really tiny brush. So a bigger brush will not only help the painting go faster, but it also kind of makes the brush strokes more interesting and more deliberate. And I'm trying to think of a good way to say this, but it makes the brush strokes match the area. So in an area like the upper chest here, where there's not that much going on. It's not as complicated as the hand here. It's not as complicated as the face. We don't need lots of tiny little brush strokes there. It would look almost overdone. And then some of the highlights on the hair are also very cool. Again, coming from that cool light source. I think what I'll do, unless if there's any questions or anything in particular you want me to work on or that you're curious about before we wrap up, just please feel free to type that in. Otherwise, I think what I might do is just block in the arm a little bit here, and then wrap up for tonight. I kind of like to get some of this yellow underpainting covered. Also found interesting too with this outdoor figure series is that the lights are very cool. They're very light. They're quite grayish, but again in these turning areas, and we really see that in this arm here. I know you can't see the whole thing, but from what you can see here, that's where we're getting those warms and those high chroma colors. So I really try to kind of take advantage of those opportunities for high chroma colors, because it brings this lifelike quality and stops the painting from being too washed out. On their own, they might be too much, even, too high chroma, too vibrant. But they balance out the coolness in the lights and then all the grays as well. Using a smaller brush, I'm just going to work on this little crease in the elbow and then paint around it. All right, I think I will actually paint the hand. Try not to overthink it. Sometimes doing things quickly can be a good thing. Sometimes for fingers or knuckles in particular, I like to, again, increase the chroma and bring more kind of pinks and oranges. So I'm just going to add a little bit more light, a little pop of color along there, even though I'm not seeing that in the photo reference and, probably wouldn't have seen it in real life. But I think it'll just add kind of a nice quality. And in this one, for now, I'm going to leave the upper arm quite hard edged. You can see it's really sharp along here, and that really contrasts with the softness of the the moving hand. And I kind of like that contrast, because we get a sense with this arm that the hand is moving, or the lower part of the arm, but not the upper one. Whereas here, it's the whole arm is moving, and we're getting that sense of like a bigger motion. I'm just going to pop a little bit more light in here now that I've had a chance to work on that hand. And then we will wrap up for today. All right, so there we are. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so you can see it on a more normal level. Not quite as close up. I'm going to a bit more light. Don't want to cause some glare. There we go. And I'm just going to make sure the colors are reasonably accurate here. Yeah, again, these fluorescents are just so vibrant in real life. So just imagine like really strong neon coming through there. And then the face is going to be a whole other challenge, but hopefully you get a sense of where it's going. So thank you so much for watching and for your great questions and for being here tonight. Were there any other questions that were on your mind, or anything that wasn't very clear, or that you'd like to see next time or see differently? I'm always happy to have ideas. Thank you very much. Really appreciate being here. Appreciate you being here. A little note too, I have been trying to record these so that you could watch them later, and I actually forgot until about halfway through this one, so sorry about that. About half of it is recorded, so I'll try to make that available and let you know next time though. So have a wonderful evening. If there's any other questions that come up later, feel free to shoot me an email. And I am trying to do these once a month, so I think the next one will probably be end of February-ish. Though I do have a painting workshop at the end of February, so we might have to bump it into March. But if you are interested in the painting workshop, it's from February 24th to 28th, and it is online, but interactive with feedback and lots of demonstrations like this. But thanks so much for being here, and have a great rest of your night. Bye, everyone.
Visit NicoleSleethAtelier.com for art courses, demos, and more.